Bombing zone. Tanks roll in. Israel unleashes Operation Iron Swords. US warship arrives near Gaza. But Hamas rocket fire continues. Iran muscle behind Hamas terror, our top focus on 5 Live.
Day 7 of the Israel-Hamas conflict, and it's time now to talk about the real power behind Hamas. Here on India Today, you made one of my most watched episodes be about what Qatar's role is in this entire affair and the support of Hamas. And now I'm putting the spotlight on Iran. I'm Shiv, this is 5 Live. Thanks for tuning in. These are the headlines. Israeli tanks roll towards Gaza as it gears up for an expected ground assault. Issues sweeping orders for residents of Gaza to evacuate to the south of the Gaza Strip in the next 24 hours. India Today reports from Ground Zero.
The India Today team right now is at the front lines of this conflict. These are the powerful Merkava tanks of the Israeli army, and these tanks have now been mobilized. We are right at the front lines. Watch around me.
Hamas terrorists claim at least 13 Israeli hostages killed in Gaza by the Israeli airstrikes. Meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces strike down at least 750 terror targets in Gaza overnight from the air. Destroyed Gaza plunges into a massive humanitarian crisis. Houses reduced to debris. Israeli strikes level most parts of the urban Gaza Strip. Medical supplies are running low. Pregnant women have no access to clean water. This is a looming disaster for humanity. A day after meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets Palestine President Mahmoud Abbas in Jordan. Amidst the Israel-Hamas war, Modi talks tough on terror, says the entire world has woken up to the terror challenge, condemns lack of consensus on the definition of terrorism. Seven days after the Hamas terror attack on Israel on October the 7th, the Jewish state is on the threshold of its biggest ground offensive in history into the Palestinian territory of Gaza. Now, you've been watching India Today's Gaurav Sawant, my colleague, reporting from the Frontline as endless columns of Israeli Merkava battle tanks roll towards the Gaza Strip as we speak. A galvanized Israel intends to keep rolling until Hamas is obliterated in all its forms. The question, though, is, what about Iran? That's right, what about Iran? A huge country in the region that has direct links with Hamas. A country whose role in the October 7th attack, even at this early stage, is beyond doubt. Nobody has any misconceptions about that. A country that has supplied everything from rockets to anti-tank weaponry to drones to Hamas, alongside valuable funding to train generations of jihadis. And it is believed a safe haven for the Hamas leadership whenever they have needed it. Iran hasn't fought a full-scale war in many decades now, but flexes its muscle via groups like the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, like the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Media reports suggest that Iran may have had more than just a supporting role. The Wall Street Journal, for instance, reports that members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard may have visited Lebanon to actually sign off on the October 7th attack by the Hamas 6 days before it happened. Now, Iran, of course, has denied all such reports of its involvement, but has, not unexpectedly, welcomed the attack by Hamas and openly congratulated both the Hamas and its leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who is known to live a protected life in Qatar, as I showed you on my show just a couple of days ago. Now, Iran's proxy battles in the region are now very well known, but the question is why? You're asking, what does Iran have to gain from this? What does Iran gain from supporting Hamas, supplying it via smuggling tunnels with rockets, anti-tank weaponry, drones, anti-aircraft missiles, mines, light machine guns, and so much more? The issue, viewer, is this. Prior to the October 7th attack, Israel's relationship with the Arab and Muslim world was heading slowly in the direction of normalcy after decades of animosity. President Joe Biden of the United States, in fact, was famously attempting to mediate a Saudi-Israel link, a handshake that would get these two big countries, for the first time in history, Saudi and Israel, to see each other as nations rather than bitter adversaries who need to be destroyed. In September this year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Turkish President Recep Erdogan, whose own government has been a supporter of Hamas and has always been virulently anti-Israel. Netanyahu and Erdogan meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly has hinted at a new normalization of that broken relationship between Israel and Turkey. So there is a hint of normalization in that direction as well. As a nation that poisonously calls for the direction of Israel, Iran itself had seen a path of normalcy appear with the United States. The Biden administration earlier this year, viewer, had taken a decision to unfreeze $6 billion of Iran's money, allowing it to access that money after decades of sanctions, in exchange for the release of 5 American prisoners. While the US says now that it is still investigating Iran's role in the Hamas attack, Iran, for the moment, can just forget about those $6 billion, obviously. The attack has additionally given people like Donald Trump a juicy opportunity to claim vindication, since he had ferociously attacked President Biden over the $6 billion in aid deal with Iran. Expect this to become a huge election issue in America as Biden heads into the polls next year. Iran is a very, very touchy topic in US politics, as you know. But the question now is, with everything that we know and everything that will emerge after investigations, will Iran face any consequences of any kind from Israel or from the United States? Yesterday, we saw how Israel had launched missile attacks on 2 airports in Syria, in Damascus and Aleppo. These were said to be preemptive strikes to send out a message. Now, Syria and Iran are, of course, not the same. Syria, after years of war, is a depleted force with no real military to speak of, and the ISIS is a formidable strength in several areas of Syria. Iran, on the other hand, viewer, has a full-fledged military capable of taking on a power potentially like Israel. Now, the US Gerald Ford aircraft carrier battle group that's headed into the Mediterranean and arrived there on Tuesday, we are told, isn't just for solidarity with Israel, make no mistake, and I'll tell you a little bit about this a little later. It is an unmissable American message to perhaps Iran more than any other country. As the global spotlight now rests on Gaza, the shadow of Iran is only set to darken. Now, the war between Israel and Hamas, if you haven't noticed it already, is like a vortex with a potential to drag other Arab states into it. We've already seen Syria, we've seen Lebanon, the Hezbollah attacking Israel, attacks happening in Syria, Israel making different noises, other Arab countries hailing the Hamas as well. So what's going to happen next? How does all of this surround sound around the Gaza Strip in Israel affect what's going on right there on the ground? Lebanon and Syria, I beg your pardon, have already been dragged into it. Most other Arab nations are on the verge of deciding. With each passing day, this war escalates, and there is a risk of a catastrophic expansion beyond what we can see.
There's a war raging in Israel between Hamas and the Israel Defense Forces. And like in all wars, there are others. Some neighbors, some allies who play key roles. And some who try to act as mediators in this war, which has the potential of turning into a much larger conflict that can engulf the entire world. Israel by the Mediterranean Sea is surrounded by Arab League countries. They are at war with Hamas, the militant Palestine Islamist group. Of the 22 Arab League countries, Lebanon's Hezbollah and Syria have already trained their guns at Israel as it started airstrikes on Palestinian ghetto of Gaza. In fact, within hours of Hamas attack on Israel on 7th October, Hezbollah supporters gathered at the Israel border. Another key player in the Arab League, the United Arab Emirates, has warned the Assad regime in Syria not to intervene in the Hamas-Israel war or to allow attacks on Israel from Syrian soil. But Syria has already defied the diktat. Israel's immediate neighbors, Egypt and Jordan, haven't yet joined the war, but have strong words of condemnation for Israel. Jordan suggests a two-nation theory solution as proposed in the 1967 Accord, but doesn't hesitate to threaten to stand by Palestinians against Israel.
وسيظل موقف الأردن ثابتا.
Jordan's stance will remain steadfast, and we will not stray away from our role despite challenges in defending sacred Islamic and Christian venues in Jerusalem and protecting them under Hashemite custodianship.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi called the escalation in Gaza highly dangerous, and that Egypt was pushing with regional and international partners for a negotiated solution to the violence. In the last few days, people from Gaza have gathered at Rafah border, which is the only crossing point into Egypt's Sinai. The rest of the Gaza Strip is surrounded by Israel and the sea. A key player in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, has been in talks with Israel about normalizing relations, as it also walked a fine line. It called for an immediate end to the violence, but did not explicitly denounce Hamas. An agreement with Israel was in the process while Hamas launched its attack. That deal is now in deep freeze.
One of the reasons it carried out its attack now is because of the prospect of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And over the past few weeks, even months, Hamas officials have been quite open about the fact that this would be a huge event.
The other key Arab League member, Qatar, has offered to mediate while playing host to Hamas leaders, including its chairman, Ismail Haniyeh. And then there are the other non-Arab Islamist countries who are playing key roles, like Turkey.
We openly oppose the killing of civilians on Israeli soil. Likewise, we never accept the massacring of innocent people in Gaza through constant indiscriminate bombing. Cutting off a city's water, electricity, entry and exits, collapsing its infrastructure, destroying all of its centers of worship from mosques to churches, as well as their schools, preventing people from getting the most fundamental needs, and bombing housing units where civilians reside. In other words, managing a conflict using every sort of embarrassing method is not a war. It's a massacre.
Turkey has backed Palestinians in the past and hosted members of Hamas. It has been working to mend its ties with Israel after years of animosity. Unlike the European Union and United States, Ankara does not consider Hamas a terrorist organization. And then there are the non-Arab states like Iran, who have been speaking up for Hamas from day one, but don't enjoy good relations with Saudi Arabia and some of the other Arab nations. As the war rages on, it surely widens the fissures between the Arab countries and has the possibility of bringing in more Islamist states in its purview, leading to greater destabilization of the region.
Now, ever since the attack on October the 7th, the Hamas has been in overdrive with propaganda videos, basically trying to flaunt their capabilities. Since I began this show on the topic of how Iran has been funding and arming Hamas, this particular video, it's a propaganda video by Hamas, let me make that very clear. And in normal course, we wouldn't want to play any propaganda, but I wanted to show you clips of this video because it really reveals something very important. What you're seeing here is the Hamas terrorist group pulling up water pipes for sanitation and water supply in the Gaza Strip and fabricating them into lethal rockets, the very rockets that have been fired by the Hamas into Israeli territories. They're called the Qassam rockets. Would you believe it? Water pipes, civilian sanitation water pipes of the kind that bring water to villages and towns and cities all over the world, including our own here in India, pulled up from the ground illegally by Hamas and then using know-how from where? Of course, from Iran, because Iran is a country that has done rocket technology for a very long time. They've basically taught, I'm simplifying it of course, but they've given Hamas the know-how to manufacture these rockets in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And that's the reason why this particular video is so telling. The Hamas terror group taking away the assets required for the Palestinian people, depriving them of infrastructure required for water supply, where there is no water right now, and then using them for offensive purposes. Now remember, this is not to say that Israel is not playing a role in the lethal blockade that is leaving Gaza hungry and thirsty. But this video that Hamas was hoping would be a depiction of its lethal effects and its lethal know-how and innovation using everyday objects is really proof of how it steals from the Palestinian people in order to murder the Israelis. Now, the United States Navy's mightiest symbol of power projection, an American military might, has just entered the Mediterranean waters off the coast of Israel and Gaza. Viewer, you already know what I'm talking about. A gargantuan symbol of solidarity that President Joe Biden announced just hours after the October 7th Hamas terror attack in Israel. The USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier is the biggest warship ever constructed. I wanted to explain why such an enormous ship with its carrier battle group comprising destroyers, cruisers and submarines, all of them with land attack missiles and enough weaponry to invade a small country, has been deployed just off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean Sea. You're thinking surely Israel doesn't need military assistance in its campaign to destroy the Hamas in Gaza. After all, even a well-armed Hamas is no match for the Israeli Defense Forces, right? Well, there's a reason why this ship has arrived off the coast of Israel. Let me explain. First off, the USS Gerald Ford carrier battle group is obviously not just a symbol, even though what it signals and symbolizes is very much as significant as what it can do if push comes to shove and if it's provoked. The signal the US is sending out is that America not only stands firmly with Israel, but that it is fully willing to enter the fight if the war does expand, and if the Hamas's well-known patrons, including countries like Iran that we're talking about, even think of any direct provocations in this war. The USS Gerald Ford carries a large number of combat aircraft capable of long-range strikes and assisting Israel in targeting Hamas sites if necessary. Right now, that's not on the cards, but if necessary, the US will not think twice in putting the assets on board this ship into the fight. Now, this is not likely to happen in the current Gaza operations, but concerns over this conflict widening to other parts of West Asia are actually the bigger concern right now. Israel's airstrikes yesterday on Syria have signaled that things could well be poised to move beyond just a contained Israel-Gaza affair. In the small chance that this becomes a wider regional conflict, the US, with this ship, will be positioned to respond very quickly with a carrier battle group of this kind in the Mediterranean Sea. It's basically like a floating military base. It has aircraft, it's got submarines, it's got long-range land attack missiles, it's got air defense systems. It's basically a floating military base that can be taken from one place to the other. Now, carrier battle groups of this kind have participated in operations around the world, but as a wise person once said, the true strength in such formidably large force is if it never needs to be used. And that's the whole point of the deployment, to dissuade, to deter, and hopefully contain this conflict. And now I want to go straight across to India today's Gaurav Sawant, who's been reporting from the front lines in Ashkelon, Sderot, and other parts of the front line with Gaza. Gaurav, in just a few minutes from now, I'm going to be playing out your incredible report. It's the most watched report from the front lines of the huge column of armor from Israel rolling towards Gaza, which basically indicates a ground invasion is in the pipeline. Many movements happening there, but Gaurav, I'll let your report do the talking about that. What I wanted to ask you more about was the sense you're getting from the ground about whether this conflict could expand. You're on the ground, you're seeing the tactical fighting taking place, but the USS Gerald R. Ford is off the coast, not very far away from where you are right now. Strikes have happened in Syria as well. Are you getting the sense this could expand, Gaurav?
Shiv, being forewarned is being forearmed, and that's a old military saying. It's proving to be true here. Now, right now, Israel has been forewarned that there could be action even on the northern front. So while the southern front, where we are, has been adequately, well stocked up, deployment done, resources in place, it's the northern front where a lot of deployment and resources are being put in place even as we speak. There's a lot of convoy movement that's happening, a lot of civilian trucks also carrying men and material both to the south and to the north, because sooner than later there will be an expansion. The moment the Israeli ground forces go into the Hamas-controlled Gaza territory, Gaza Strip, other parties will get activated, and that is why, as you rightly pointed out, the USS Gerald Ford being here with a formidable flotilla with its fighter jets and assets. The aim is to deter, but then it's only a sane mind that would get deterred. There are all those elements who would massacre 1,200 plus civilians are not sane minds, and they would resort to perhaps more insanity, and you cannot counter insanity by being logical. So that's exactly what Israel has learned from this terror attack. We were with some army officers who have been a part of that very extensive exercise to carry out, one, assessment of security, two, investigation of this case, because a very solid case is going to be built up internationally against Hamas to shame those who continue to either directly or overtly or covertly support the Hamas, or do that monkey balancing about Hamas also having a right to exist because they're elected by the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. Here, every dead body of the victim has been photographed, fingerprinted, DNA samples taken, how they were killed, how young women were raped before they were killed. All of that is being documented. Internationally, people are being called, shown everything, every bit of evidence. How toddlers had their heads chopped off is something that coroners here are not only documenting, but also making an international report for the world to see. that hatred of Hamas, it was there for all to see. That again, that report that you pointed out,
Yes.
water pipes. If people are crying about water not going to the Palestinian territory, those pipes were removed by who? By Hamas. All of that is being pointed out, Shiv, and perhaps the ground operations will begin in some time from now, and the war only is likely to expand even to the northern front sooner than later.
Gaurav, stay safe. Your amazing report, which I'm told is the most watched war report so far in the coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict right now, is going to be playing out at 5:30 p.m. You don't want to miss that, Gaurav, with that big Israeli armor column headed towards Gaza. Stay safe, Gaurav. We'll connect with you again very soon. Now, we know that the Hamas has been planning the October 7th siege for the last 2 years, if not more. Remember, something of the scale that Hamas managed to do, killing 1,200 Israelis, taking so many of them hostage, is not something that they could have planned in just a couple of weeks. Men, materials were mobilized. And now an India Today open source investigation has revealed that even the hostage-taking plot was planned in advance. And I want you to pay special attention to this story by India Today's Ankit Kumar viewer, because the Hamas, after the attack, has been saying hostage-taking is not part of their policy. They do not take hostages as a part of routine. It was something just happened spontaneously. Here is how we prove them wrong.
Civilians paying the highest price in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The terrorist group initiated it. Ordinary Israelis targeted, maimed and killed when Hamas launched its unprecedented guerrilla-style terrorist incursion into Israeli territory on October the 7th. Civilians in Gaza plunged into a crisis as the Israeli military bombs their territory, choking supplies to the tiny enclave, home to 2 million residents. On its part, Hamas has sought to portray civilian casualties as accidental, collateral damage. In statements issued to local outlets, the Hamas claims its so-called Palestinian freedom fighters aim to avoid targeting ordinary Israelis. Evidence, however, suggests otherwise. A purported 14-page operational document discovered on a Hamas operative's body within a pickup truck by first responders has been shared by an online group of first responders. Labeled top secret, apparently by Hamas, the document suggests attacks on civilians were part of a well-thought-out plan. A plan the Palestinian terror group hatched as early as October 2022. The strategy, as explained in the document, involved raiding Israeli settlements called kibbutz, the assault to be led by a commander, and 2 squads, each consisting of 5 attackers. The raids on the kibbutz, which are basically self-contained communities, carried out with precision. Now take a closer look at point 7. Hamas operatives, led by their commanders, specifically instructed to take soldiers and residents as hostages for negotiations later. A section in the same document noted potential presence of approximately 1,000 civilians in another Israeli settlement along the Gaza Strip. Survivors recount the horror they witnessed firsthand when the Hamas invaded Israeli territory briefly last Saturday. Many civilians accuse the Israeli government of failure.
I want answers from the government. It's not possible. My service was there. There was always people prepared for things like that because it's the nightmare of all the soldiers there. It's not possible. The party was authorized by the IDF and by the police. This is something, it's not an accident. There's something more serious happening here. And we want answers to our questions from the government.
Hamas's planning dossier provides a detailed insight into the intentions behind the attack.
Why?
150 hostages currently in Hamas custody in the Gaza Strip. A plan written, drafted on paper, and executed on the ground. With Ankit Kumar, Bureau Report, India Today.
And I don't want you to miss what's coming up next, because this is, like I said, the most viewed and most shared war front report. It's by India Today's Gaurav Sawant, who you just heard on the show. He was right there on the ground when a big column of Israeli tanks has been rumbling towards the Gaza border. An unmissable report comes up next.
You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a B&P Group company. Israel-Hamas blood feud returns. All-out war engulfs West Asia.
Look at the massive destruction. So this is just a matter of 5 minutes.
Fearless reportage and exclusive news breaks.
You just heard those sounds of the blast.
Bombed out house here in Ashkelon in southern Israel. India Today is the only team which is reporting from the border.
India's biggest conflict reporters, live and exclusive. West Asia War through cameras. You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a B&P Group company.
Massive movement of the Israeli army right behind me. Watch these images. You see a large number of Israeli army personnel moving right towards the front lines. Watch these images. These are soldiers of the Israeli army moving towards the mission along the borders remains extremely grim, and you can see these images. These are soldiers who are all moving towards the front line, one after the other, one vehicle after the other, and all singing songs of bravery and patriotism. Songs of bravery, songs of patriotism, songs that fill Israel with enthusiasm and the will to fight. Here is where you see these Israeli soldiers singing songs of bravery on their way to the border. This is one of the final lines. This is this actually shows you the morale of the Israeli army. This is the army right on the front lines. And you can see their morale high. They're singing songs of valor. They're singing songs of patriotism as they head to the border to
The Gaza Strip is fully under siege by the Israeli military as we speak, viewer, and at any time, a ground invasion could take place. This is what the Gaza Strip looks like. It's 41 kilometers long, it's a dozen kilometers broad at its widest tip, and there is no escape from any side. The Hamas is known to have tunnels that go into Egypt and elsewhere, but those are unusable right now, which means that the people of Gaza are completely stuck inside the Gaza Strip. From the northern part of the country, 1 million citizens of Palestinian origin have been asked to move south towards the southern part of Gaza near the Egypt border. But they're all stuck because the siege by Israel is complete, and next expectedly is going to be the ground invasion. I want to show you the most watched report regarding what could be coming next. And all indications are it's going to be an armored assault, which has happened twice before into Gaza by the Israel army. India Today's Gaurav Sawant was right there, and he witnessed the beginnings of this ground invasion. Take a look at this.
India Today team right now is at the front lines of this conflict. These are the powerful Markava tanks of the Israeli army, and these tanks have now been mobilized. We are right at the front lines. Watch around me as the howitzers, the tanks and the infantry combat vehicles of the Israeli army are all slowly getting mobilized, and all of it is happening right here with the flags of the Israeli army. These soldiers are now prepared. The mobilization has already taken place, and the forces are now moving forward. Their deployment, their locations constantly being changed, and an element of surprise is making on they are moving forward very, very quickly, very capable tanks and very rapidly, and you can see these tanks are rolling more and preparing for to launch its intensified. The tanks of the Israeli army that are now being mobilized. There's only military movement that is permitted here. No civilian movement is permitted here. We are permitted to come here because we have a special pass to come. These are the front lines. This is absolute front line of Israeli military deployment and location. Behind me, these very powerful tanks locked and loaded. Some of these tanks were initially deployed at the front line where there was a breach in the fence. That breach in the fence was where the terrorists had infiltrated from. So these tanks were keeping an eye. They were keeping a hawk eye on any infiltration that was taking place to prevent it and to found where it took place. It's more than a regiment of a tank that's behind us. Perhaps 10 tanks more, but in this case, we counted a large number of tanks, more than a regiment that has gone in, and it was the process. We are not very far from this movement. Very clearly make out that these tanks are moving in big numbers to be able to dominate the area where they are deployed. Just a short while back, we also saw movement. We were reporting on the movement of infantry combat vehicles in this area. I want to show you how these tanks are moving all along this area. Israel means business, and Israel's army chief had made that very clear yesterday. All alone, they've been mounting 750 sensitive locations for the Hamas. Strongholds of the Hamas have already been founded. The archery and India today has also anytime, and some indications are that you already have frontline troops out. Let me explain how the operation is usually carried out in such a situation where you want to occupy a higher ground or you want to occupy a first, the Air Force founds the enemy to ensure that the Hamas is no longer in a position to retaliate when ground troops go in. Air Force uses precision execution. After the Air Force, you then have the artillery that continues to pound those locations so that get down. And that is the time when the armor, these are actually the first responders in this battle. When the armor movement moves in, the infantry combat vehicles, the armor, infantry combat vehicles provide protection to ground soldiers as they rapidly look at this terrain. Because of this terrain, you will have tracked and not wheeled vehicles that are moving forward. So on tracks, you have soldiers in infantry combat vehicles and in these Merkava tanks moving forward. After infantry combat vehicle and armor, once they have ensured that they have their dominance and the adversary is down, that is the time when the ground soldiers will move in and occupy what is known as in military parlance, create vital assets and vital points. They will take those domineering positions all along. Gaza at the front line is not very far from here. And in Gaza, you have various locations that are founded. ये जो आप मेरे पीछे तस्वीरें देख रहे हैं, ये इजरायली सेना के मरकावा टैंक है और बहुत तेजी से इस समय यहाँ पर मूवमेंट शुरू हो गया है। अगर आप बिल्कुल मेरे पीछे देखें तो एक नहीं, दो नहीं, बड़ी संख्या में इजरायल की सेना के टैंक अब एक लोकेशन से दूसरे लोकेशन में आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। इनकी तैयारी पूरी है और आप पीछे देख भी सकते हैं। मैं लगातार टैंकों को गिनने की कोशिश कर रहा था और एक रेजिमेंट से कहीं ज़्यादा, यानी अगर 20 से 22 टैंक एक रेजिमेंट में होते हैं या 24 टैंक, तो उससे कहीं ज़्यादा टैंकों की आवाजाही, टैंकों का शुरू हो गया है। और यह आपको बता रहे हैं कि इजरायल की सेना ने मन बना लिया है। और क्या हो रहा था, लगातार पहले लड़ाकू विमानों से हमास के विमानों को ध्वस्त किया जा रहा था। हमास के विमानों को जब विमानों से ध्वस्त कर दिया गया, विमानों से बमबारी करके उसके बाद 155 किलोमीटर से बमबारी, भारी बमबारी की गई। कोशिश यही थी कि हमास के जहाँ जहाँ लड़ाके हैं, हमास के जहाँ जहाँ अड्डे हैं, उन्हें पूरी तरह से तहस नहस कर दिया जाए। और उसके बाद अब ये टैंकों का मूवमेंट शुरू हुआ है। इन तस्वीरों को जरा गौर से देखिए। ये तस्वीरें आपको दिखाते हैं कि किस तरह का इलाका है और यहाँ कैसे टैंक आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। ये पूरा रेगिस्तानी एक तरह से इलाका है। हालांकि इसमें यहाँ अच्छी रेगिस्तानी नहीं करता है, लेकिन दूसरे चीज़ों की यहाँ टैंकों का मूवमेंट अब शुरू हो गया है। और यहाँ से अब इजरायल की सेना के टैंक, इजरायल की सेना की कब्जे कर रही है। एक मरकावा टैंक से आप इसकी नाल को देखिए और इसके ऊपर लगी मशीन गन को देखिए। ये टैंक अब धीरे धीरे आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। इसमें जो सैनिक ऊपर तैनात थे, वो इन टैंकों को आगे कर एक जगह से दूसरी जगह तक ले जा रहे हैं। जिस तरह से ये मूवमेंट हो रहा है, इससे आपको अंदाजा लगेगा कि कितनी बड़ी संख्या में इजरायल की सेना यहाँ पर तैनात की गई है। ये गाजा पट्टी से बहुत हमें जो जानकारी मिली है उसके मुताबिक IDF यानी इजरायली डिफेंस फोर्सेस ने पिछले 24 घंटे में 750 ऐसे संवेदनशील इलाके निकाले थे। 750 ऐसे वाइटल एसेट्स और वाइटल पॉइंट्स निकाले थे जहाँ पर हमास को और उन हमास के स्ट्रॉन्गहोल्ड्स को पूरी तरह से ध्वस्त किया जा रहा है। जब हवा से मरकावा टैंक है ठीक मेरे पीछे और इनके साथ जो इन्फेंट्री कॉम्बैट व्हीकल्स है ये इसके पीछे पीछे जाएगी। एक मकसद पर जाके 10 से 15 सिपाहियों को ये अपने एक दूसरे को जान के लेकर जाते हैं, लेकिन उस मकसद पर जाके ऊपर से हमला ना हो जाए, यानी किसी बिल्डिंग के ऊपर हमास के आतंकवादी ऊपर निशाना न बना ले, इसीलिए इस पूरे आकाश के ऊपर कई जगहों जगह मानव रहित दो ही विमान यानी अनमैन्ड एरियल व्हीकल जो भी है और वो अनमैन्ड एरियल व्हीकल इस पूरे आकाश पर और पूरी धरती पर जो गाजा के ऊपर है उस पर चप्पे चप्पे पर नजर रखे हुए हैं। उसी से अंदाजा लगेगा कि किस तरह से वहां पर इजराइल की सेना का कोई रास्ता न रोके, उसके लिए क्या क्या तैयारी इस समय की गई है। पहली बात। दूसरी बात, मरकावा बहुत ही सक्षम टैंक से ये पूरे एरिया को डोमिनेट करने के लिए इजराइल के पास इस तरह के टैंक से और बख्तर पर गाड़ियाँ पहले हवा से ध्वस्त किया जा रहा है, फिर जमीन से ग्राउंड फोर्सेस और उससे पहले इंडिया टुडे और आज तक पर अपने एक्सक्लूसिव को तस्वीर दिखाई थी जिस तरह से ग्राउंड पर 155 मिलीमीटर तोपों ने पूरी तरह से हमास के ठिकानों को ध्वस्त कर दिया था। जमीन से, आकाश से और समुद्र से तीन तरफ से हमास पर यूं कहे चौतरफा हमला है, क्योंकि अब ग्राउंड फोर्सेस की एंट्री की पूरी तरह तैयारी में है। अमेरिका के विदेश मंत्री एंथनी ब्लिंकन यहाँ पर जब इजराइल में थे तो उन्होंने भी साफ तौर पर कहा कि न केवल एक पिता के रूप में, एक पति के रूप में, एक इंसान के रूप में, बल्कि एक यहूदी के रूप में भी उनके मन में वो दर्द है और वो दर्द समझ सकते हैं। हाउ Israel is feeling the pain of the terror attack that was carried out by Hamas. It's been 1 week of the terror attack. Even as we speak, 1,200 plus people were massacred here. In fact, some of the areas where people were massacred is not very far from where I am standing right now. Kafar Azar is not far from where I am right now. Some of those kibbutz are barely a stone throw distance from where we are. And this is where Hamas terrorists and massacred people, 1,200 people. And this is how an army sees the tanks, and right behind the tanks you see the tracked infantry combat vehicles with their troop loads inside. This is the infantry combat vehicle, and this is the rear, the door, the gate is at the rear, and this is where troops inside all set to go in. Depends on when they get their orders to move in completely. They're moving forward as per plan, very systematically, very slowly. The aim is to completely decimate the Hamas strongholds. Once they've been decimated from the skies and through artillery fire, then strengthen own territory. That's exactly what Israel has done in the past 1 week. They've ensured that there are no remnants of Hamas terrorists inside their own territory. The moment that was completely ensured, internal security, police, paramilitary forces, they've all been deployed, civil defense has been deployed, locals have been deployed, and these are those small infantry combat vehicles of the Israeli army, all set, locked and loaded to go in. The tanks have moved, now the infantry combat vehicles are moving. So anytime now, the moment those instructions are given, Israeli forces will move in. India today is right at the front lines of this battle in West Asia, getting you the latest reports. We were the first to show you how air attacks were intensifying, how artillery was pounding Hamas bases, how armor was moving forward, and now how these infantry combat vehicles, and behind them the special forces locked and loaded, ready to go and decimate the Hamas terror. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the army chief, they've both been very clear. This country is on the same page with one objective. That one objective is to completely decimate the Hamas and ensure that Gaza Strip can never be used to launch terror attacks on this part of Israel. The southernmost part of Israel remains most vulnerable. But despite all this movement, despite the air attacks and the artillery pounding, ground troops will have to go in, because even now Hamas retains the capacity to strike. Rocket attacks have been happening inside Israel. Even yesterday, till very late at night, we were near Sridot and rocket attacks were happening, though the Iron Dome was able to interdict and destroy most of the incoming rockets in the sky itself. But a couple of rockets did fall, one close to a hospital, one on the road harmlessly, but at the same time, the threat of rocket attacks still remains. We've been speaking for the past half an hour, and even before we got here, the armor movement was happening. Mechanized infantry columns have been moving, the special forces have been moving, the ground forces have been moving, and all in full public flow. It just shows how massive is Israel's response going to be. One of the officers we spoke to told us that this is the fastest ever mobilization in the history of Israel, with 300,000 soldiers, with 3 lakh soldiers being mobilized in a couple of days, battle ready, locked and loaded and ready to go. That's exactly what Israel intends to do. This is day 7 of the deadly terror attack launched by Hamas, in which 1,200 people were massacred, more than 1,200, and more than 3,000 injured. Israel is still counting its losses, but resolute in its will and decision to decimate Hamas and ensure that the Gaza Strip no longer poses a threat. Hamas no longer poses a threat to people living in this part of Israel. Gaurav Sawant in southern Israel for India Today.
You are watching India Today, powered by Finest, Be Sustainable Change, a B&P Group company.
First, let me say this with regard to 9/11. If you look at this in proportion to the size of Israel's population, this is the equivalent of 10 9/11s. That's how big and how devastating this attack has been.
In a litany of brutality and inhumanity that, yes, brings to mind the worst of ISIS. Babies slaughtered, bodies desecrated, young people burned alive, women raped.
The President's been very clear. I've been very clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel in its determination to defend its people, defend its country. We stand with Israel in its determination to do everything possible to ensure that what happened on Saturday never happens again. And in that determination, we are, of course, as you know, providing assistance as requested by Israel for its efforts. That will continue. And we're working closely with Congress to make sure that Israel has what it needs to do what it must.